Our next presenter is Philippe Ailleris. He is currently with the European Space Agency as a project controller. It should be noted, though, that this presentation is undertaken as a personal work, not necessarily endorsed as research activity by ESA. Also, he's a board member of, as stated, UFO data, but we'll just say UAP data, and is a project that advocates to utilize a large network of automated surveillance stations with sophisticated sensors to monitor the skies 24/7, looking for aerial anomalies. In 2009, Philippe also founded the UAP Observations Reporting Scheme project that collects UAP reports from the astronomical community. And with that, Philippe, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ed, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you won't have any problem to understand my French English, but I will try my best to be clear. So thanks also to the organization and to the organizer of this session. So I think as a sixth and last speaker, and as a logical follow-up of the previous interventions, I'm going to talk about some concrete approaches now, which will have for objective to better detect, study, and characterize the UAP phenomena, and hopefully we'll be able to better predict such events in the future. Next slide, please. All right. Having said that, I would like to start my presentation by providing a few points of general context, and I would like to underline the necessity of not only collecting UAP reports from trained observers like air crews, but also in acquiring instrumented data. And I think Ravi made the point very clear at the beginning. Of course, we are all very pleased to observe since a few months the favorable trends surrounding the UAP discourse, and we hope that this will facilitate in the future the reporting of sightings and encourage also a true scientific research. For sure, in order to make progress on learning more about the nature of UAP, there is the need to implement better data collection, not only in terms of enabling the reporting of serious observations, like air crews, but also in engaging in instrumented approaches to acquire UAP data. So such reports and data are absolutely necessary for the scientific community for engaging in research and learning about the physical characteristics of UAP. Overall, it's my opinion that different strategies and courses of actions need to be pursued in parallel in order to increase our chances of finding a solution to the UAP's challenge. Next, please. Concerning the aviation world and atmospheric science, should be reminded that scientists had previously not paid sufficient attention to eyewitnesses' accounts, including airplane pilots, of some peculiar flashes or some giant flashes of light illuminating the sky above thunderstorms. And it is only at the end of 1989 that some university researchers accidentally capture such natural phenomena, filming them on a low video camera. Since then, this research activity has really progressed to the point that a special instrument has been launched in 2018 to the International Space Station and is currently studying such phenomena from low orbit. The main point there is that I wish to make here is that air crews are good witnesses of unusual phenomena, and they should be really encouraged to report their UAP observations, as they could represent a new and important atmospheric phenomena like the sprites or something else. And I think the previous speaker also emphasized very well this point. Next, please. So about the UAP Task Force report, when I read it, I spotted the comments regarding the reticence to report UAP observations. This reminded me that in Europe, it was the same comment that was raised already 20 years ago within the Project Condotte, which was a secret UFO study undertaken by the British government's Defence Intelligence Staff between 1997 and 2000. It was a report that was released into the public domain in 2006. This project reports mention also there was evidence that airplane crews were seeing far more than they were reporting due to the fear of ridicule or also the potential effect on company business. So like the previous speaker, my important message today is that we are facing a stigma which exists since decades in the aviation world, and that it's really time now to take concrete action for mitigating it. Obviously, the justification for encouraging UAP reports should be twofold. Firstly, maintaining or improving flight safety, and secondly, related to the part of the human intellectual curiosity which seeks to extend our knowledge, leading potentially to new scientific discoveries, like in the example of the sprites. Once this topic is taken seriously, then science can move forward. Next, please. Now, I would like to propose a first important concrete action directly connected to the promotion of safe flight. I would recommend first that access is requested to a few selected aviation databases, the ones collecting information on safety incidents or special occurrence, and to extract UAP incidents and perform a thorough analysis. This would help understanding better the UAP occurrences and guide future research. Different databases exist, and we could start by selecting a few of them, like the following ones. The FAA, which has an unmanned aircraft system database, although despite the difficulties that have been mentioned by the previous speaker. It will also be useful to add the NASA database that they maintain themselves, called the Aviation Safety Reporting System. And of course, in order to complement that by having a global perspective, we should consult existing relevant databases outside America. Canada would be a good choice via the Civil Aviation Daily Occurrence Reporting System, or CADORS. And in fact, a special request could be raised towards the private company NAV Canada for accessing the report themselves. Outside North America, the United Kingdom Civil Aviation Authority and a scheme called the Mandatory Occurrence Reporting could also be included. Also, in this UK case, access will only be possible via a special application, justifying it by the objective of maintaining or improving aviation safety. Next, please. So it is obvious for all that just the collection of good sighting reports and examining aviation database won't be sufficient. The only way to resolve this lack of understanding about UAP phenomenon is through serious scientific study. As mentioned today by Dr. Ravi, ultimately, any new research will need to engage in collecting new data going forward. Such effort should lead to a systematic collection of credible and high-quality data. Although this is a great challenge, there is also time for exiting new possibilities nowadays, and I would like to share with you now two positive developments. First, this scientific approach is much more doable than before. This is due to the rapid evolution in information and sensor technologies in terms, for example, of availability of off-the-shelf scientific instrumentation, powerful computing, sophisticated software, and ubiquitous high-speed internet access. All of this at a lower cost than before. And secondly, because I think that we have enough technologies available that dedicated and expensive systems don't necessarily have to be built. Instead, we could rely on collecting UAP data through existing systems. So I will now, for the rest of the presentation, talk about these two approaches, which in fact demonstrate that UAP can be studied with the tools of physical science. Next. To illustrate such approach, I would like to say a few words about field instrumented missions, and I was glad that the previous speaker mentioned the Hesdalen research. Since several years, and not only in Norway, but also in Italy and France and America, various civilians, associations, and few scientists attempt to detect and analyze UAP using scientific equipment and placed in the same geographical location from where UAP sightings have been reported. The project Hesdalen, located in a small Norwegian valley, is a leading example of such effort. In fact, this project represents the longest active fieldwork as it started in 1984 and is still operational nowadays. The objective being to capture data across the electromagnetic spectrum, and therefore a wide range of equipment is deployed here, as illustrated on the slide. Despite the fact that there's unexplained lights have appeared at random intervals, the project had obtained throughout the year several successes of optical and radar detections. A few examples are shown. But Another point that is that we have to make clear is, in fact, the objective of this project by Norwegian scientists is to discover the physical mechanism causing the sphere of lights. And a few Norwegian researchers think that such knowledge, for example, could open the way to breakthrough technologies for lighting applications or energy sources. Next, please. So a second example that I wish to present is related to the US-based project called UFO Data that Ed has mentioned and to which I participate. The project is not yet operational, but in fact, important progress has recently been made with the building of the UAP monitoring station appearing in the picture on the side. Such station is of course consisting of 3 instruments which will be able to measure many characteristics of UAP as displayed, including visible and non-visible light spectrum, local environment factors, and others. The station will continuously run for 24 hours a day, and data will be recorded by most instruments only when an event will be detected. And of course, afterwards, several unique artificial intelligence capabilities will be used in order to reduce the false alarms. However, compared to SLALN, the UFO Data project will follow different strategies in order to increase the chances of collecting UAP data. Overall, the principle is to build a public science of UAP thanks to the deployment of a large international civilian network of automated surveillance stations that will be connected to an event data server. Next, please. As I mentioned in the introduction, I believe that different strategies are needed in parallel and that there are already existing technologies that could contribute well to the UAP research. One promising new method that I would like to present to you relates to the use of civilian Earth observation satellites and associated data. After all, the single site where we can learn the most about our planet is nowhere on Earth but high above it. The satellite images that are acquired on a continuous basis are powerful scientific tools to increase our knowledge of the environment. So one possibility is to use the civilians and governmental free open satellite data to mine for UFO data. In fact, this sounds like a very good concept, especially after I read the declaration of the former intelligence director who mentioned that UAP had been picked up by satellite imagery. And also, I have read with interest the latest FAQ from NASA, who makes a reference to such strategy now. So next part of the presentation, I will explain why I think this represents a potential promising research method for detecting and collecting hard scientific data, but what could be a potential application, and also some first ideas for databases extraction strategies. Next, please. So in order to realize the potential importance of satellite technology for UAP research, let me briefly recall the main advantage of the Earth observation satellites. In this case, I use the example of the 2 European Sentinel-2 high-resolution optical imager satellites, which are currently in orbit. So the satellite capture regularly on a regular basis the data. Second, they have an excellent precision, like up to a few meter resolutions. Third, they cover a very wide geographical zone, including areas very difficult to reach and several environments, and on a continuous basis. The archives of the satellites are kept, and mainly in order to see the environmental trends over a long time. And like in this case of this European satellite, part of the Copernicus program, the satellite data access are free. So next, please. So in parallel of these unique abilities of benefits of Earth observation satellites, should be mentioned that during the past years, technology and satellite companies offering to scientists have increased dramatically, and the trend is going faster. The world observation data is rapidly changing due to 2 factors. On one hand, there's a huge increase of number of Earth observation satellites launched into orbit, and obviously this results in a massive increase of data collected. And on the other hand, also there are many different actors that are entering the market with many new ideas to build and put in orbit full constellation of satellites with the objective to cover an image constantly and every day across the planet. So on the other hand, in parallel of this huge increase of Earth observation data, there is a very rapid advance in the field of artificial intelligence, with now unprecedented capacities to retrieve and analyze all this collected data. So I think combining all the two together, I think this overall create an unprecedented opportunity for examining Earth observation satellite data to search for aerial anomalies, UAP, or unusual signatures. Next, please. So in order to illustrate first this concept and the potential application, I will show you first some example of optical pictures taken by the Sentinel-2 Copernicus satellites. As you can see on the screen, the main point is that flying objects like airplanes can easily be observed on pictures, as the satellites are even at an altitude of 780 kilometers, and the instrument is covering a wide swath of 290 kilometers wide. And so the shape of the object, in that case the plane, is quite clear on the images. Next, please. The rainbow image is a composite product, in fact, combining three spectral bands of the satellite, which allows reconstructing a red, green, blue, false colored image. As explained on this slide, this is in fact a single airplane, as the scaled color patterns for the moving airplane and the contrail is due, in fact, to the physical distance between the filters aboard the satellite. Next, please. The interesting thing, according to me, is that knowing the fixed attitude of a satellite and the physical distance between the different sensors on the instrument aboard the satellite allows to retrieve some relevant important parameters, like, for example, the size of the plane, which can be calculated in relation to the number of pixels on the image. The velocity and the altitude of the plane can also be derived via calculation. So to me, it seems that this could represent a potential application for UAP research, as some new specific algorithm could be built for the detection of flying phenomena in satellite optical databases and for the extraction of potential area anomalies by applying some threshold on such parameters. For example, we could detect phenomena related to the observables that have been mentioned in the previous presentation in relation to peculiar shapes, observable structures, aspect ratios of the flying phenomena, or pictures at abnormal altitudes, or reflecting some abnormal velocity. So to make the link to the aviation databases, we could even think perhaps using satellites data to first detect and characterize UAP that have had near misses with aircrafts. And even at the end, all what we have are optical photos, not spectral or any other data. This would already be a step forward, according to me. Next, please. So obviously, there will be the need to refine the algorithm searches in order to reduce the time to sift through huge Earth observation archives. I list now on this slide some first ideas that I had about spatial and time-based analysis methods that could be applied, and some logical ones, of course. And depending on how feasible and time-consuming such extracting algorithm could be, and applying artificial techniques like machine learning on them, we could, for example, going through some satellite optical archives and attempt to detect, as I said before, anomalies via threshold on some observables, or we could try to retrieve data from the same date and location of specific credible UAP event, like aircrew sighting. This could be even an aviation report or a sighting that has been identified in one of the archives of serious ufological associations reporting systems. Or perhaps we could even systematically retrieve data for same geographical area over a long stretch of time, like the Hesdalen in Norway, or any location where there's suddenly an increase of UAP activity, like around the east and west coast of America. So, perhaps a good idea is we could target location and period during special events, maybe like during a special deployment of military forces or training exercises, because apparently UAP activity seemed to increase during this period.
2 minutes.
Next, please. So in fact, we have reached the end of my presentation, and rather than summarizing what I just told you, I think I would rather bring forward those 3 complementary points. So for sure, the UAP is an enduring mystery that has been going on for even over 70 years at least, and it has relevance, as we see today, to the aviation, the military, and a lot of citizens. So I think that today we have, compared to the past decades, we have the technological capability to study it, and we have the opportunity to make progress. And at this moment, as the last point, is the UAP subject is gaining legitimacy, and the stigma is being reduced. But now it's really the evolutionary responsibility of the scientific and professional community to engage in this research opportunity. Such research which is difficult, requires proper funding and proper course of actions and strategies. Thank you. This will conclude my presentation. Thank you. And in case of any question, I'll be happy to hear. And I hope everybody understood me. Thank you.
Philippe, thank you. And most engaging, and your points spoken quite well. Definitely in comparison with my ability to speak French under the same set of topics. And I'm sure many share in that sentiment. So again, my sincere congratulations on that and appreciation. Now, let me start off with question and answers for Philippe. Please go ahead.
Hi, Philippe. This is Christopher Plain, head science writer at the Debrief. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, thank you.
Great. You gave some imaging and other examples of how satellite data might be used to add, shed some light on the mystery. Is that a proposal to use satellites that are already in service and having them retasked? Or was this a proposal for satellites dedicated to this project?
No, my proposal is, as I said before, is the tools already exist, and it will cost too much to develop new specific system as a starting point, I would say. So we have to take advantage of what is available, and there's the possibility to use already highly calibrated and very effective satellites instruments. So we should take advantage of them. And in that case, there are several databases that are already available for free. Of course, we can also contact specific satellite private companies who also have archives in order they would help, but then we'll need to pay them. But so I don't advocate for building a satellite and launching a satellite dedicated to UAP detection. Although maybe a very small satellite could be done.
So you're recommending both utilizing the databases of information that are already captured and stored
Yes.
from existing satellites, as well as potentially tasking them to specific events.
Maybe I was not clear enough. I think we have to build up algorithms to retrieve the data from the existing satellite data.
Databases.
Existing
Okay, great.
databases. Now, because the next step is much more expensive and you will need much more expertise and technical abilities, time and money.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, Philippe.
Hi.
Hello?
Hello. Yeah, I hear
Okay.
you.
Okay, great. Really fascinating talk. Thank you. I was curious about the Sentinel-2 ESA satellite and what specifically is kind of the technical reason for the satellite doing these Earth observation images from 3 different spectral bands over time, over the course of its orbit. I'm curious to know just why it's already doing that.
The Sentinel-2, and with the optical instrumentation, was devoted to the analysis of the vegetation, in fact, especially for helping crops and to how do you say that, to understand the situation, the health status of the crops. So it's for agricultural reasons on the ground, because they can detect through the different instruments how dry is the ground, if you need to water, and if you what is the health status, if you need to put more products in order to make it to improve the crops production. So it was mostly for this kind of the nature of this agriculture and for feeding people basically at the end of the day.
Yeah,
to increase the capacity.
So with the airplane and the contrail, is the fact that this is like a very white, bright object that's reflecting the entirety the reason that it's producing this effect?
Alors, if I may compare, in the past, we had these spy satellites or these defense satellites, and they were taking just pictures above specific points, a specific time. Now the satellites are evolving in a kind of following a carpet mode picture. They acquire continuously picture across this swath. So you have a huge amount of data. And of course, when they pass across areas, they will take a picture of anything that is in between. So my idea is, I mean, we could use this opportunity to try to progress in the field. Of course, the satellite is not dedicated to this kind of survey, but the advantage is they are there. You don't need to develop an instrumentation, and the data normally is available. What needs to be done is the building up of the specific algorithms and retrieving the data and analysis.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
All right, Philippe, that will finish up our time allotted for the... Okay, and I thank everybody for your patience. Our next speaker is Peter Reali. Peter is a board member of the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. He's a retired electrical design engineer and manager from Silicon Valley. At Silicon Valley, his specialty was in telecommunications, information technologies, where he designed network communication systems, fiber optic ring networks, and timing synchronization. Further, he earned his bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. So, Peter, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the AIAA for having us here today for this, important event. As I said, my name is Peter Reali. I'm with the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, which is, been in existence for a few years now. And we're dedicated to trying to put a scientific basis on understanding these phenomena. So next slide. Since you've already introduced me, I'll just go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to be talking today about the Nimitz event, which has been covered a little bit already before. The Nimitz event in 2004 is probably one of the best documented cases. It's been it's 6 pilots and 2 very qualified radar operators who testified that this is a valid event that really happened. So I'll be talking more about them later. Next slide. Okay, so the background on this was there was going to be a naval exercise in 2004 with the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz and its surrounding ships. And these objects had been observed for a few days before the actual exercise by Kevin Day, who's already been mentioned here. He was a chief, he was in charge of the radar. And the objects were descending from 80,000 feet to 28,000, and then from 28 down to the surface, and going very erratic behavior. And there were groups of them. So the exercise was canceled. And, the radar had been calibrated for a few days before. They'd been calibrating it many times. And this is a very advanced radar, SPY-1 radar, phased array radar, very, very state of the art at the time. Next slide. Okay, the methods we used as the forensic analysis, the SCU was investigating this case the year before it came out in the New York Times. And we've interviewed several of the people involved in it. We've done FOIA studies. We also have done a lot of kinematic analysis based on the reported measurements that were taken. And we do a statistical analysis, a null hypothesis, which is, and basically what we're trying to show is try and prove that this is a misidentified conventional object using conventional physics. That's the approach. And if we can't do that, then it has to be anomalous. So next slide. There were three basic encounters in this particular, in the Nimitz event. The first encounter was by the radar operators, David Day and Gary Voris, which was we already talked about. The second was when the actual event was canceled, the exercise, they sent out two planes by David Fravor was the commander of them, and he actually descended down and got a close-up of the object, and that's where the Tic Tac visualization has come from. The third was after they returned to the Nimitz aircraft carrier, they sent up another plane with two pilots, and they, with a flare camera, which is their video camera, it's an infrared camera, a targeting pod, they actually captured a video of the object. And that was done by, recently came out, the pilot has testified to it, Chad Underwood. Next slide, please. Okay, we use two kinematic analysis from basic physics, assuming, as mentioned before, the objects would hover at either high altitude or at sea level. They would then rocket up to the halfway point and then start decreasing their velocity to hover at the other point. And so we assume two kinematic analysis here, one for a linear velocity, and next slide, the other for a parabolic velocity, because at the center point, the halfway point for the linear velocity, there would be a huge acceleration change. So it was trying to make it, how could we make this so you could do this with a rocket engine in conventional physics? And it turns out that the it doesn't make a lot of difference. You trade one thing for another. Next slide. We also calculated the power requirements for this based on conventional Newtonian physics, basically force times velocity. And since we had the calculated velocities and accelerations, and we assume in this case, we don't know the mass of the object. We assume very conservative mass of 1 ton. And whereas like an F-18 airplane, which could have probably been the only other plane that could have been in the vicinity during this exercise because it's a restricted area, weighs 16 tons unfueled. So that we did some kind of advanced conventional technology of 1 ton. Next slide, please. The results were, again, these amazing, unbelievable velocities, accelerations, and power. So because it was said to, it was 0.78 seconds for it to descend, we took a devil's advocate and said, well, what if it's 6 seconds, was mistaken or something like that. The net result is that for the 6 seconds, the most very conservative, is that the velocity was between 16,600 miles per hour and 10,227 miles per hour. For the 0.78 seconds, it was 104,895 miles per hour to 78,409 miles per hour. For the acceleration was, for the 6 second was between 204 Gs to 310 Gs. And for the 0.78 seconds, it's 12,250 Gs to 18,385 Gs, depending on, of course, the assumed kinematics of it, assumed, how the thing was accelerating, which we don't know, but we know what the averages are, so we can assume these two different trajectories. The power is just phenomenal. That's to my mind, the most anomalous thing about it is the power, because there's no conservation of energy says this must be released to the atmosphere. Yet the power for the most conservative 6 second case varied between 11.3 gigawatts and 9.75 gigawatts. Now, to put this in perspective, A gigawatt is a good sized nuclear power station. Maybe 1 to 1.5 gigawatts is what they produce. So this would be 11 of them. And for the linear case, it's phenomenal. It's 5,126 gigawatts and 4,440 gigawatts. This is equivalent to about a 1.05 kiloton of TNT being detonated per second, like a small tactical nuclear weapon. Next slide. The conclusions are no human could sustain the calculated 170-pound human would be subjected to a force of 17.6 to 1,041 tons. It would kill anybody. A 6-second parabolic trajectory is equivalent to 2.3 tons of TNT being detonated each second. The 0.78-second parabolic trajectory is equivalent to a 1.05 kiloton tactical nuclear weapon being detonated each second. And again, there was no report of any disturbance in the atmosphere. So the speed at maximum velocity would be equivalent to a meteorite entering the atmosphere from outer space. None of these effects were noticed by the personnel reporting this incident. Next slide, please. Okay, the second incident is one of the most interesting, and that is when David Fravor, commander, he's the commander of a flight wing, a squadron, I think, flight is the right term. And that was David Fravor, Jim Slate, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, and one of their pilot who wishes to remain anonymous. All these people said this happened. They flew out from the exercise off the coast of Baja California in 2004. And when it was canceled, his two planes were sent out to investigate the radar images about 40 miles away from their cap point, which was the cap point is the terminology for where they do their exercise. They fly against one another and practice. They were going to be heading over to the Middle East for their deployment. They flew out to 40 miles out and out at the point, probably hard to see the number there, but at 40 miles out, David Fravor was alerted down below on the water was this white disturbance on the water, and he noticed this object bouncing around. So he decided to descend and keep the other plane up above. He descended down to about 8,000 to 10,000 feet. And at that point, the object, he could see the object was this tubular object, and it sort of noticed him, and it moved out in an opposite direction. So he decided to cross and intercept the object. When he started crossing over to intercept the object shot off and described as like shot from a gun. So that, that there's no timing of it except shot from a gun, which means usually you can't see it. A few short time later, I'll say, the radar operators said that the object was back at the cap point. So it had traveled 40 miles horizontally and vertically, also with a vertical altitude probably of 10,000 feet in a very short amount of time. It's seconds, perhaps. Next slide. So this is how it was described. This is from a video by Dave Beatty. It's like I say, it looks something like a natural gas tank with some appendages on the bottom. Next slide, please. Now, shooting out of sight could be due to two things, and we took those into account. One is it shot over the horizon. The second one was visual acuity of the eyesight. Now, good eyesight, you can see 1/60th of a degree, or 1 arc minute. And after that, you can't really begin to recognize it. And also the object was described between 56 to 60 feet long. And what we did is this thing could have been traveling at different angles. So we considered 60 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet, because it could be observed in different aspect ratios. Also, we considered calculations for between very good vision of 1/60th of a degree down to 1/15th of a degree. Next slide. So for the over the horizon, it's very easy to calculate the horizon is at different altitudes. We found that can't be the case because at 10 to 8,000 feet, the horizon is more than 100 miles away. and the object showed up at the 40-mile distance. So next slide. So for the visual acuity, we took all those factors into account using a little bit of trigonometry. We could calculate the the distance and the time required. Since shot from a gun is a little bit nebulous, we calculated for a series of different times, 0.2 seconds, 0.5 seconds, 2.5, and 5 seconds. And I'll talk about 0.5 and 5 seconds. The reason is 0.5 seconds from psychological studies is about the time you can notice, it takes for the brain to notice changes in perception that has been measured. And 5 seconds is, nobody can really say, 5 seconds probably at the limit that you would say something shot from a gun. So next slide. What we got for that calculation was another more astounding, characteristics. For the half second, which is the, shot from a gun, the maximum accelerations varied from 83,400 Gs to 3,202 Gs. And the for the not shot from a gun, the 5 second one, it varied from 834 Gs to 32 Gs. All of these would destroy an airplane. For the power, maximum power for the shot from a gun was 1.71 times 10 to the 5th gigawatts. And again, I'm assuming we're assuming a 1 ton mass. It's weight, but you convert it to mass. And so we get 1.71 times 10 to the 5th gigawatts. And remember, a gigawatt is a nuclear power station. And for the minimum, 1,290 gigawatts. For the not, for the not shot from a gun, it varies from 171 gigawatts to 1.29 gigawatts, all anomalous. So next slide. So the final conclusions are the blind point distance wasn't determined to be, due to visual acuity. Looking at the acceleration in all cases would be intolerable to human pilots. In most likely cases, any mechanically complicated mechanism would disintegrate due to the excessive forces. Certainly any airplane would not survive. The power dissipated by any known type of heat engine would have caused noticeable, highly visible effects to the negative strike group, due to conservation of energy. That kind of energy has to go somewhere. 5, the only component of velocity and acceleration considered was the horizontal trajectory. In the first case, we considered the vertical, so you'd have to add that as well, so there'd be even more energy. We're just trying to show, do the simple calculations that show the anomalous effect. The null hypothesis event that this event is explained by known objects that were misidentified can't be substantiated. So the objects remain unknown, of unknown origin and technology. Next slide, please. The third one is the encounter by Chad Underwood, where he with his flare camera, his targeting pod, actually, got a video of it. He did not see the object. He was far enough away, but caught it on his flare camera, and it was doing the same behaviors as described. He has recently come out and done a video and several interviews talking about this. He remained quiet for quite a few years until this all became public, and then he finally came out. And this shows a targeting pod which mounts under the plane on the left. On the right is the screen that the pilots see with the metadata and an example of, we had to study the metadata to understand what the different parts are. A lot of this is not very easy to do because much of this is classified. Further, an important point that is often left out about this is when these objects were viewed, they were using a narrow field of view, which is about 0.7 angular degrees. And this is equivalent to a telescope of about 80, perhaps 80 power, 100 power. So they can see objects miles away. And this has been testified with multiple pilots. So next slide, please. Here's an example of what you would see of, these are stealth aircraft, the F-35 and the B-2 bomber. You can see in infrared, they're not invisible. They're invisible radar, or pretty much invisible radar, not perfect, but very hard to detect. And you can clearly see the outlines. You can because as the objects move through the atmosphere, they're heated, and so in this case, white is hotter than the background, and so you can actually see on the left the F-35. You can see the exhaust coming out of its tail, and it's characteristics of it. And so as this is with the infrared characteristics. Next slide, please. Now, this is how we calculated the trajectory based on this. Since on the left is the sensor, or it could also be used like a human eyeball, and we know the field of view of the camera, and we also know the estimated size of the object. So using trigonometry, you can estimate for different distances and the same size object, you can actually estimate the field of view that the object travels through. And on the screen, we divide the object into 12 reticles, 12 divisions. The object takes up a certain amount of space on this. And so you can calculate, if you know the timing, which I'll talk about next, you can actually calculate the speed and acceleration. We again use the linear, in this case, we use basically the linear velocity approach because we know the averages, and it's just a convenient way to treat it because we don't know the real trajectory, but it has to be something on this order of magnitude. Next slide.
2 minutes.
Next slide. Okay. In this case, this shows the framing. With the framing, we can determine the timing of how the object moves through the screen and get the timing for the object. Next slide, please. In this case, we had two things to deal with here. The size of the object viewed on the screen, it has a dense center and then a corona around it. So we had to deal with two sizes, the two diameters. We did calculations for both. The second was a complication. As it moves to the left, the pilot increased the zoom. So during the X2 portion of the screen, the distances have to be halved. And next slide. The net result is these graphs are for two what we call early zoom, late zoom. I won't talk about the late zoom because it's really unrealistic. It was done just to emphasize, just to have a sort of a devil's advocate against it. The realistic and most conservative is the early zoom case, and the plane flies at the object flies at 30 to 110 Gs. Next slide. In this case, the power requirement, you can calculate the available power of an F-18, which is the only plane possible in the area, and it's also similar to probably even any other kind of advanced jet. And it only had 1 to 34% of the needed power to perform the observed accelerations. The same with the late zoom, even less, 0.8 to 4.5%. So it can't, next slide. Okay, so here's the conclusions. The Tic Tacs are not aircraft of any known type, exhibit technological capability beyond anything that existed in 2004 or that exists today. Tic Tacs exhibit at least one of the following characteristics: no aerodynamic airframe, no obvious means of reactive propulsion, acceleration characteristics beyond human endurance, and airframe structured capability. If the apparent movement of the left is due to vibration of the airplane, well, basically what this is saying is that the only reason you can lose lock is through excessive acceleration to the left. The fourth one is Tic Tacs for a missile. It would be smaller and closer to the plane, and it would not have acceleration calculated in the flare display as shown above. Next slide. The Tic Tacs were a missile or an airplane. As it moved left, it would have to bank. Well, the plane would bank, and the missile would show its longer edge, and the diameter of the image of the flare display would move left, and it does not happen. If the Tic Tacs were F-18 size aircraft, it would be between 18 and 33 miles from the flare camera, And with this telescopic capability, we'd be capable of identifying it by its shape, or certainly by the external dimensions of the image on the screen. The size would be able to be calculated, and we'd have shown above. 7, the Tic Tacs demonstrate accelerations greater than 40 Gs and most likely much higher, with no noticeable effect on their structure or performance. Here we are using the early zoom figures from table 1 as the most conservative. 8, the flare is capable of registering the maximum dimensions of aircraft airframes and showing that the aircraft structures that support lift and maneuver functions none are observed. There's no lift capability. 9, the F-18 does not have adequate power to exhibit even the minimal required acceleration for the maneuvers that are observed in the video. And I think I'll stop here.
All right, Peter, thank you. We have about roughly 3.5 minutes for questions. So please, anyone go ahead and for Peter.
Peter,
Phil, he's gonna
it's,
ask you-
sorry.
I'm sorry,
I have
go
a
ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. It's Philippe Ailleris talking. Peter, just a question. If you would have to ask the military some related data, which ones would you consider studying? The radar data as a first priority or something else?
I had a little trouble understanding what your question is.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if you would, if it would be possible for you to ask the data from the military, what kind of data would be the first objective? Like the radar data would be the most important to study?
What's the most important data to study?
Yes.
Well, we'd like to have the radar. We'd like to have radar, and actually we'd actually like to have, this is only a small part of the videos that were taken, and we'd like to have the whole video, and see, many of these things, we only get little snippets of it, and there's, so we'd like to have radar, any kind of RF measurements they have, but basically any of the data, it all's just, we have almost nothing, we have to scrounge around to get anything, and that's basically about all I can say.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, Peter, I was going to be asking you just from the point of view of this, would you consider that in a generic sense, one of your greatest challenges for what you're doing?
Yes, the inability to have the hard data to get, and the not having the data to analyze is very difficult. We have to you go to extreme measures, and we have to make assumptions that if we had the data we wouldn't have to make, and they're good assumptions, but they're not they're not they don't really dial into the actually what's going on. They're very broad, and they just show that things are anomalous, but we'd like to have more detail on this. And it's most of this stuff is classified, but they could be released. This data could be released and scrub the classification part of it and just give us the data. How you got the data is not, details about your instrument and stuff, and it's not so as important. Although perhaps some of the giving away some of this stuff, might reveal some secrets. But this was 2004. This data was 2004, so they've made things advanced quite a bit. So you could, it probably, I'm sure that by this time it's not that classified, but once things get classified, it's very difficult to overcome that.
All right, Peter, thank you. And with that, that'll conclude our first portion.